Hi, so perhaps you're a storyteller and you're keen to find ways for your stories to convey more of an environmental message. Perhaps you're somebody working within education who wants to find stories that can help the people you work with connect better to the natural environment. Or maybe you're somebody who works within the environmental field, keen to find ways to bring about positive change for the benefit of the environment. Well, if you fit any of those, continue listening. My name's Carl. I'm a storyteller, one of many hats I've worn over the years. I have always had a very strong connection to the natural world. I began my working career within zoological parks, public aquaria. I went on to get my degree in marine biology, worked within national parks, and currently I work within community development and juggle my storytelling around that. And recently I was sat in on another conversation amongst storytellers, trying to find ways of exploring this question of environmental storytelling. And the same subjects came up, and it was then that I suddenly realized there was an opportunity to bring in a theory of change with regards to environmental storytelling. And so I have an idea that I want to share with you, and then perhaps at the end of this, if it's something you want to know more about, or maybe you even want to get involved, then please do reach out and get in touch. So, environmental storytelling and creating a theory of change. How do we begin? What is it and why? So I've put together this little presentation here just to take us through some of the early steps and help set out what's going on up here. So the first question I want to look at is why? Why do we need a theory of change? Well, let's start off by looking at the tool itself, storytelling and stories. Well, take this subject on its own, and there's lots of different ideas, different trains of thought over what storytelling is and what storytelling isn't, which stories work best and what you're trying to achieve. But fundamentally, how do we know that storytelling makes a difference? Clearly it does, but how? The next question is looking at the issue of the environment itself. If we're going to apply storytelling and stories to create positive impact for the environment, well, what do we mean by the environment and environmental storytelling? Are we talking about the protection of species, addressing the next great extinction event? Are we talking about reducing pollution, increasing recycling, more intelligent use of resources, plastics? The questions, the subjects roll on and on and on. So collectively, when you add the question of stories and storytelling to the question of the environment, well, it's an interesting mix. And you might be inclined to think, well, there is a desire for change and so it will automatically lead to action. But look around. That isn't always the case. When there are so many conflicting viewpoints and opinions, quite often it leads to inaction. The inability to act because the scale of the issue is just too big. And that is why I feel a theory of change might help break out of that cycle. So what is a theory of change? Well, it's potentially quite complex, but let's look at it simply. There's me as a storyteller, and I'm keen to create positive environmental change through my storytelling. Okay. But there's all this stuff in the middle, isn't there? How does my storytelling lead to a positive environmental impact? And that's what a theory of change is. It looks at the stuff in the middle. It works from the inputs, the things we put in and the actions we take, and eventually the impact we want to achieve. And it breaks it down into a series of steps, looking at what are the outputs we're achieving, we're creating, generally the actions. Those outputs will lead to outcomes, short-term, mid-term, long-term. What is the sequence of events that ultimately leads to impact? Now, in an ideal world, there would be a seamless link right the way through, but of course, it isn't that straightforward. There are barriers at every step, at every stage, things that get in the way, that interfere, but equally there are also things that help the process along. And underpinning all of this are assumptions. A theory of change helps us explore this whole pattern, tease apart the different strands to understand the cause and effect of what we're doing, making sure that the actions we take carry meaning, are optimizing our intentions. Now, that sounds great, doesn't it? As an idea. So how do we begin to take that idea forward to create meaningful change, to create a theory of change? Well, this is where I'm suggesting, and this is why actually I'm creating this video, I want to connect to the wisdom of crowds, the idea that the more people you ask, the closer you get to a genuine answer, a realistic answer. And there are four main principles within this. The first one being diversity of opinion. I could create a theory of change for myself and my own storytelling, but that would have limited value because it would only be my opinion. I'm keen to hear your opinions. The second point with the wisdom of crowds is independence. If you're able to exercise an independence of viewpoint, then that's really valuable when it comes to collecting information. There is also the importance of decentralization, dispersed viewpoints that draw upon local perspectives, local knowledge. And then finally, if you're going to make use of the wisdom of crowds, you've got to be able to aggregate all those opinions into a collective decision. And that really is where the theory of change, I believe, can make a difference to us as storytellers and people who share stories. So, who? You? Me? Well, in truth, I can't be entirely sure yet. If we're going to get diverse opinions, well, certainly storytellers is a starting point, certainly for me as a storyteller, but I also know that needs to extend outwards to include other people involved within the environment. Ultimately, we're on about the development of a working group, bringing a collective group together who can discuss things, share ideas and opinions. I'm keen to collect those viewpoints together, and I can then begin to feed those into a theory of change, which itself will begin to generate additional questions that working group can begin to answer, delving deeper, fine-tuning the answers, fine-tuning thinking to create meaningful connections between what we do and what we're trying to achieve. The purpose of this whole process, well, I'm open for that to be decided upon by whichever working group comes together. And finally, when? Well, yesterday. I've seen these conversations go round and round and round. And whilst it's great to talk, there comes a point where we need to act, and I'm keen for that action to begin to make a difference. I've got an outline methodology of how this will work with structured discussions with that working group, maybe broadening out, I don't really know, but the key questions would be informed by the fundamentals of a theory of change. Once we get to the point we're beginning to get a model for that theory of change, or as I say here, models, because I have a gut feeling we're going to need more than one to cater to all the different areas within the environment. But ultimately, I hope we can get to a point that we have a loose framework that can be shared with a wider audience and further develop as time goes on. The challenges within this, and there are challenges, it is a huge subject. And it's quite possible that the subject is too big for us to apply a theory of change. But I'm okay with that. Because even if we don't get to the point of a completed theory of change, nonetheless, the conversations, the precise questions being asked are fundamentally going to develop the ideas, the conversation, and ultimately feed into individual practice. Answers, we're going to find gaps in our knowledge for certain, but that's great because once you know where the gaps are, you can do something about it. And the group size for the working group, well, there is that question of what's big enough and what's too big. It needs to be manageable. I don't know what those answers are yet. This is just an initial step to see what the interest is. As to the potential benefits, I see them as broad and far-reaching. I'm writing this very much from a storyteller's perspective, but I'm sure anyone who is working within the environmental fields will see the benefits themselves. But clearly, all of these are huge. Ultimately, the biggest benefit will hopefully be that we can develop the power of story to create change, to create meaningful change. We can make sure that the energy we devote to this pursuit is well spent, that we don't spend years banging our heads against a brick wall, and that every step we take is a step further along on that journey. So that's the idea. Right now it is just an idea, and I'm currently looking for people who would be interested either in following the progress of this particular journey or actively taking part in discussions, maybe even joining the working group. There may even be scope for sending out questionnaires to different people to get broader perspective. But please, if you are interested, please get in touch. And thanks for listening.